This is Into the Multiverse with Josh Peck.
Hello and welcome to Into the Multiverse. Boy, have we got a fascinating, exciting show for you today. We're going to be talking about the multiverse. Coincidentally enough, it's the name of the show. But we're also going to be talking to Andrew Klavan, best-selling author, host of the Andrew Klavan Show on the Daily Wire. You're going to want to check that out. That's going to be a little bit later. But first, if you haven't had a chance to do so, it is really important to subscribe. Make sure you click the little bell and tell YouTube that you always want to be notified. And hey, let me know if you're not notified, because I've been getting some emails from people saying that they click the bell, they do everything they're supposed to, and YouTube still isn't notifying them. So I'd be interested to know if that's the case. Let me know if it is. But in case you don't get notified, every Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Central Time, you will get a new episode of Into the Multiverse right here. We're also on Roku and Apple TV and a whole bunch of stuff. For more information about everywhere you can find Multiverse, head on over to skywatchtv.com. All right, so really interesting story about the multiverse today. Apparently, it's been reported that new research has shown that if there is a multiverse, and according to scientists there is, then it's teeming with alien life. Now, never mind the fact that we've never seen the multiverse, never observed that, we don't have any real scientific experiments to show that it exists. Never mind that. Scientists are telling us that not only does it exist, but it's also teeming with alien life. Now, of course, headlines always sensationalize this stuff. That is just going to happen. But what led to this new research? It's actually just based in theory. Apparently, it's all based around the idea that scientists have that there should be more dark energy in the universe than there is. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, we've done episodes on dark energy before, but it's basically this mysterious force. Scientists can't really describe it. They don't really know what it is, but it's some type of mysterious force that is causing the expansion of the universe. It overcomes gravity and it causes the expansion, and supposedly it's supposed to make up 73% of our universe. But apparently that's not enough. 73% isn't enough. So there are new theories that say that there should be more dark energy in our universe. But the problem is when you add more dark energy to our universe, everything flies apart so fast that everything just can't form and it dies, and it's just death and destruction all around. So that's no good. That doesn't work. But that's where the multiverse comes in. This is where scientists use things like the multiverse as a way of making their theories work when they don't really work. It's like, oh, just add more dimensions. That's all you need. But that's what they're doing. So they're saying if there is a multiverse, then that would account for the problem with everything flying apart. You know, then you could have gravity still remain intact the way that it is now. You wouldn't have too much expansion. You would have just the right amount, because all this extra dark energy would be spread across all these different universes. And this, of course, would allow there to be more dark matter without killing everything in the universe and plunging us all into death, destruction, and darkness. So here's a couple of quotes from some research fellows. Pascal Alahi, a research fellow at the University of Western Australia, said, quote, "We asked ourselves how much dark energy can there be before life is impossible. Our simulations showed that the accelerated expansion driven by dark energy has hardly any impact on the birth of stars and hence places for life to arise. Even increasing dark energy many hundreds of times might not be enough to make a dead universe." So that's positive and uplifting news, right? John Templeton, a research fellow at Western Sydney University, said, "The multiverse was previously thought to explain the observed value of dark energy as a lottery. We have a lucky ticket and live in the universe that forms beautiful galaxies which permit life as we know it. Our work shows that our ticket seems a little too lucky, so to speak. It's more special than it needs to be for life. There is a problem. This is a problem for the multiverse. A puzzle remains." Of course. So, believe it or not, this new research does not include the idea that maybe our universe is special because God created it, and the many worlds interpretation of the multiverse is just a fantasy created in order to get away from having to be responsible to an all-knowing, all-powerful God. But that's another story. And actually, next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about the multiverse. Strangely enough, we don't really focus on the multiverse a whole lot on Into the Multiverse. Usually, it's more broad with other things in quantum physics, other sciences, and even politics sometimes. But these two episodes, this week and next week, are going to kind of focus on that. Next week, we're going to be talking about some new research that Stephen Hawking talking apparently left behind that speaks against the many worlds interpretation of the multiverse. And I will also explain to you what version of the multiverse that I think might be accurate based on current science and the Bible. So that's fascinating stuff. All right, so speaking of the multiverse, I would love to introduce Lord of the Multiverse himself. No, not Jesus Christ, although he technically would be the actual Lord of the Multiverse. But no, Mr. Andrew Klavan, best-selling author. And also the whole Lord of the Multiverse thing. If you ever watch his Q&A stuff online, you'll understand what that's all about. You'll have to check that out. It's good stuff. So for those who aren't familiar, Andrew Klavan is a best-selling author. He wrote The Great Good Thing, and as well as a lot of others. His books have been made into movies, which is really, really fascinating. So best-selling author, political commentator. He hosts the Andrew Klavan Show over at the Daily Wire, and you should check it out because it's a fantastic show. Actually, everything that the Daily Wire does is really, really good. Just top-notch stuff, so you have to check that out. I had the honor of speaking to Mr. Klavan about his conversion. He was brought up as a secular Jew, and he converted to Christ, and it's a phenomenal story, and one that I think that you at home will really be able to get a lot out of. So all that being said, and without further ado, check this out. Mr. Andrew Klavan, sir, it is good to have you on Into the Multiverse. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. It's great to be here.
Well, it's really exciting to see a merging of the Andrew Klavan Show and Into the Multiverse. I'm a little biased on Into the Multiverse, but I've been a fan of both shows for a long time. So I've noticed when you go and speak at college campuses and stuff, people refer to you sometimes as Lord of the Multiverse. That is one of the reasons that I wanted to contact you. Why is that? How'd that get started?
It got started. I do it on my podcast at the Daily Wire. I do a weekly mailbag thing where people can send in questions about anything they want. And they just started to refer to me by various different names, one of the most common being the Lord of the Multiverse, which may have to do with the fact that I have commented more than once that the whole idea of the multiverse is what I call science of the gaps. You know,
yes.
They used to accuse religious people of having a god of the gaps, that anything science didn't know, they would say, well, that's God. But really, now that science has run out of explanations for why things work the way they do, they've invented this multiverse. There's no proof of it at all, just to keep from believing in God. So maybe that's how I became the Lord of the Multiverse. It's really like being the king of nothing. You know?
That's awesome. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, a lot of times Christians will happen upon this show because it is a very Christian show, and they see Into the Multiverse. What is that? That's just a replacement thing for God. That's not real. And of which I completely, totally agree. You know, the multiverse, the many worlds interpretation of the multiverse is absolutely not real, and we've talked about that a bunch of times on this show. But you know, when we talk about multiverse, we think of the universe as the Lord speaking it into creation. Well, He spoke more things into creation as well. So it's really interesting. So you
slightly different multiverse.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a play on words, and we use it as a metaphor sometimes, which allows us to get away with a lot. So you've written this book, which is absolutely fantastic, The Great Good Thing. And I wanted to talk about this because you have, I think, to me, one of the most powerful testimonies I've ever heard. And I've watched a bunch of your interviews on CBN and some of these other places, and it's absolutely fantastic. For those people who watch this show and might not be familiar with you, for one thing, shame on them because they should, but in case they're not, I wanted to talk about this. What kind of family and household were you brought up in prior to your conversion to Christianity?
Well, I was brought up in a Jewish household. We definitely were trained in Jewish ritual. We went to Hebrew school. I was bar mitzvahed at 13. But there was this kind of underlying factor that my parents didn't actually believe in God. My mother was a really devout atheist. She was one of the most convicted atheists I've ever met to the day she died. My father kind of hedged his bets a little bit. You know, he didn't want to mess around with somebody who could just, like, you know, give you cancer by thinking about it, this gigantic invisible God that might kill you. But he still was not, there was no, the God was not a presence in our household. He was not, we didn't pray, we didn't say grace, we didn't, say our evening prayers. But it was important to my father, and a lot of Jewish families are like this, it was important to my father that we just be trained in the tradition, that we not leave the tradition behind. mind. So, I guess you could call it a secular Jewish household. We did celebrate high holidays, but there wasn't a whole lot of God's presence in my house.
What was the first thing that made you start to question the secularist part of your upbringing?
Well, actually, it was that. It was the fact that, I was an all-American kid. I loved baseball. I loved astronauts. I watched all the same shows as everybody else. And I started to wonder, why am I going to this place where I'm wearing a funny hat and being taught a language I don't understand and talking about this stuff in the Bible that doesn't sound very realistic to me with miracles and everything when there's no God? If my mother's right, or if God's not a presence in my life and we're never told, oh, we're doing this in service to God, or being charitable or whatever in service to God, why should I do all this stuff? So I started to feel like a terrible hypocrite, which came to a peak after my bar mitzvah. I have a bar mitzvah, you stand up in front of people and accept your role in the Jewish faith, except I was lying. And after the bar mitzvah, I was given all these presents, these fabulous jewelry, watches, pens, savings bonds, and I put them all in a big box. And I was very proud at 13 to have some wealth, which I had never had before, my own money. But after time, I started looking at it and thinking, I was paid this money basically to lie, to say all these things that I didn't believe, that don't have a presence in my life, that don't have any reality in my life. And ultimately, one night, not that long after my bar mitzvah, I got out of bed after everyone had gone to sleep, and I snuck outside, and I threw away this box with thousands of dollars worth of jewels and savings bonds in it. I stuffed it down in the garbage so that nobody would see it. And I crept back inside, and that was supposed to be the end of my religious life. I was basically thought, I just don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't know whether there's a God or not, but I certainly don't want to be involved in this kind of hypocrisy.
Then you found yourself kind of, later on in life going through some depression and things. That's something that I can certainly relate to back in my early days as well. For me, I rededicated my life to Christ. I was kind of brought up in the church. I fell away from it, and then similarly to you, I went through a period of extreme depression, and God pulled me out of that. Now you have a really interesting story, one moment in particular that really changed this all around for you. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, one of the things was I didn't have a good relationship with my father. He wasn't a bad guy, but he and I were a bad match, really. And it put me at war with myself because on the one hand, I sort of adopted my father's values, as we all do, but on the other hand, included in his values were things that were just completely antithetical to who I was. So I was in this terrible conflict at all times. And ultimately, it did lead me to depression. And funnily enough, I was such a stickler for the truth that I wouldn't accept God. I wouldn't reach out to God in my depression because I thought that would be a crutch. How would I know I wasn't just believing to help me get out of this depression? But God reached out to me. So that's really the story. I reached a point where I was actually suicidal. I had a beautiful wife whom I loved and still have. I had a daughter who was beautiful and I loved her. And I was just sitting in a room one night thinking, they'd be better off without me. And I started literally thinking about how I was going to climb up to the top of the building, throw myself off the roof. But at the same time, I was listening to a baseball game on a radio station, the New York Mets, and they had a player whom I loved, who's Gary Carter. He was the catcher, and he was a loudmouth Christian. He was always talking about Jesus Christ. How'd you hit that home run? Oh, well, Jesus blessed me. And I just used to think, yuck. I hate listening to this. It's like a worm going down the back of my shirt, And why can't he just say I got a good swing at the bat? So at the end of this game, he drove in the winning run by beating out a grounder to first base. And the thing is, if you know anything about catchers, they have terrible knees. They're all incredibly slow. And the interviewer came up to Carter and said, how did you manage to beat out that grounder to first base when your knees are so bad? So there I was sitting there contemplating suicide, and I was thinking to myself, I just don't know how to go on living. I do not know how to live with this pain. I don't know how to live with this misery. And Carter was asked this question, how he beat out the grounder with such bad knees. And instead of saying Jesus, 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 which I wouldn't have listened to at all, he said, sometimes you just have to play in pain.
Yeah.
And I thought, I can do that. I'm a tough guy. I can play in pain. And it changed my entire worldview. It was only later after I did become a Christian that I looked back and I thought, wow, not only was that God speaking to me through Gary Carter, but God set his name aside because he knew I wouldn't hear it. He knew I wouldn't listen. He set himself aside to reach out to me. And when you think of that's the king of the universe, putting himself aside to reach out to me, who's not the king of the universe, you may have noticed, and not even really the Lord of the multiverse, I've always thought that was a magnificent act of humility and grace and mercy. And I'm really, really grateful for it, because my life turned around within weeks after that moment. And if I could go back and look that kid in the face who was thinking about killing himself, I'd slap him. You know, I mean, just a foolish thing to throw away your life. You know.
Yeah, I totally understand and feeling like that. And, you know, it really does speak to just the heart of Jesus' whole ministry, you know, who Jesus is as God in the flesh, you know, because God humbled himself to serve others. And it's absolutely beautiful. That's why I love hearing testimonies like that. Now, there's been a lot of people today, especially young people, who, you know, we can look back on our experiences and how Christ led us out of our depression and things like that, and we can be thankful for it now. But there's a lot of people who are going through that still without the revelation of Christ. They haven't received Christ yet. What types of problems do you see, especially in young people today, that could be remedied by maybe taking a second look at the gospel?
Well, you know, I think it's a great question, and I think what really it is it's the underlying logic of all our values. All our values in the West come from the church. They all come from Christianity. They're all, even the values that go back to Greece before Christianity were funneled through Christianity and transformed through Christianity, and they cause us to be who we are. So once you embrace that, you have a logic for the way you behave. You understand why you should be a free agent, why you should be able to make choices. You understand why your passions and the pleasures of the flesh are not always the right way to go, and where your virtue lies. And what I think that what I see a lot of young people having problems with is they don't have the underlying logic of why they believe what they believe. Like most people, they want to be good people, they want to do the right thing, but when someone comes along and says, well, you know, why shouldn't you sleep with every girl you meet, especially if she's drunk and she says fine, you know, they don't really have an answer to that. And you know, it's a very tempting thing to do. When somebody says, hey, if you take these drugs, you're gonna expand your mind, they don't have an answer for why who they are as they are is precious. And even in the political realm, when people come and say to them, you know, you should let the government tell you what to do, you should let the government force other people to do the right thing, they don't understand why freedom is necessary to virtue. They don't understand why, oh, you know, if you're doing something by force, you're not actually a virtuous person, and you're not actually becoming the person that you can be. So much of what they believe, they want to do the right thing, but so much of what they believe has no underlying logic to it. And until you start to explore Christianity, not just as a religion, but also as a way of being, as a way of thinking about the world, you can't really see why you are who you are. And one of the things I say in my book is that you can't understand the truth of the world until you know God loves you, because the fact God loves you is the truth of the world. And I see these kids, they are so full of goodwill, they're so smart, they want to do the right thing, but they don't understand why things that sometimes sound good are not good. And I think if you have an underlying logic to your philosophy, it really helps.
Yeah, definitely. And I've noticed that too, even in my own journey. I actually haven't really been, I wasn't brought up in politics or anything, but it was actually Donald Trump that got me interested in politics. But I've realized,
yeah, that's interesting.
But I've realized that since then, that was kind of a gateway for self-introspection to me. You know, it goes more than just the politics of the country and government and stuff like that. It's more of like exactly what you just said. Why do I believe the things that I believe? You know, why, if I'm not hurting anybody doing this one thing, then why is it still wrong? Like questions that you brought up. And for me, looking at conservatism and things like that really helped draw that out. And I'm sure that's the same for a lot of people. You know, next time we have you on, we're going to have to talk some politics, because that would be a lot of fun.
Sure.
But what is the main thing that you would want the audience to take away from your book? I'm going to hold it up again. The Great Good Thing. What is the main thing that you want the audience to take away from this book?
You know, one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of people don't have faith, not because they've thought it through, but because all the smart people around them don't have faith. And there's a lot of people in the press, a lot of people in the scientific community who are trying to sell this idea that anybody who has intelligence, anybody who is well-read, anybody who believes in science is going perforce to be an atheist. And they do it in a very clever way. They do it just by assuming that all the good people are atheists. If you're at this party, baby, you're an atheist, you know. And one of the things I wanted to say is, wait, whoa, just a minute. I have the credentials that all these guys have. I am an East Coast. I'm a coastal guy. I've worked in publishing as a novelist. I've worked in Hollywood as a film writer. I'm as sophisticated and as corrupt and decadent as any of them. and yet, I have followed the logic to another place. I know the science. I believe in science. I love science. It has not stopped me for a minute from believing in Jesus Christ. And I think the thing is, what I wanted people to say is, oh, wait a minute. Just because people tell me that the smart set doesn't believe, that doesn't mean the smart set doesn't believe, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't believe. You know, some smart set people are not that smart. And so I just wanted people to take away the idea that you don't lose your intellectual acuity, you don't lose your sharpness, you don't have to lose your cool, at all. What you have to do is you have to lose your sense that what people are telling you is necessarily true, and follow the logic to the truth. And that, if I could get a couple of people to do that, and from the letters I've gotten, I have gotten a couple of people to do that, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. You know?
I do too. That's what we try to do on this show as well. I mean, it's a Christian show, but it's also deeply scientific. We talk about quantum physics most times, and but it's really to just show that, look, there's a lot of things in science and quantum physics that other thinkers will try to twist and use to support their own, anti-Christian ideas or whatever, and you don't have to follow that same path. Well, Andrew, this has been a lot of fun. We'll have to have you back on. Where can people find you if they want to find you online, watch your show? Where can they go?
Find me at the Daily Wire, where my podcast is Monday through Thursdays, and you can find me on Twitter at Andrew Klavan, and contact me there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
All right, I hope you have enjoyed that. A big thank you goes out to Andrew Klavan for joining us into the multiverse. Wow, what a fantastic interview. We'll definitely be bringing him back on. He has a lot to say. He's got a lot of wisdom to share with us. But today I mainly wanted to introduce you at home to Mr. Klavan, in case you weren't familiar with him. But yeah, we'll be bringing him back on for future programs, because that was fantastic. All right, remember, next week we'll be talking about some research that Stephen Hawking left behind. It's brand new, just discovered, and he actually discusses in this new research how he has dismissed the idea of the many worlds interpretation of the multiverse. So you'll want to check that out. We'll explain what that is. We'll explain what version of the multiverse is actually more than one interpretation of how a multiverse would work. There is actually a version that seems to fall in line with the Bible, believe it or not. So we're going to be talking about that next week. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And again, if you haven't had a chance to do so, make sure you subscribe, click the bell, let YouTube know that you always want to be notified when a new episode of Into the Multiverse comes out. And in case YouTube decides that you don't need to know and just doesn't tell you, doesn't bother to tell you, in case that happens, just know that every morning, every Thursday morning at 9 a.m., you will get a new episode of Into the Multiverse. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me yet again, and until next time, take care and God bless.
For nearly 20 years, Dr. Thomas R. Horn has warned of a coming transhuman hybrid age. It has finally arrived. And now Zygon, the celebrated peer-reviewed journal of religion and science, has published a thesis by a professor of religion and philosophy at the University of London, identifying Dr. Horn and his team from Skywatch TV and Defender Publishing as the leaders of the transhuman resistance. But what is transhumanism, and why are academics and leading futurists worldwide suddenly so concerned with Horn's milieu? Hold on to your seat, as all will be disclosed this April. The milieu. Welcome to the transhuman resistance.
The world's top academics and futurists are identifying Dr. Thomas Horn and his milieu as the leaders of the transhuman resistance. But what is Horn and his team of researchers getting ready to expose about the rapidly approaching hybrid age that has top-level professors so alarmed? All is revealed in the new Milieu Hyper Collection. When you order the Milieu from Skywatch TV, you'll also receive the brand new full-length documentary film, The Last Religion, featuring over a dozen theologians including Chuck Missler, Gary Stearman, L.A. Marzulli, Joel Richardson, and more on the subject of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and the unfolding of the last days. This cutting-edge work was 30 years in the making and is being called the prophecy film for millennials. Also included is the never-before-released audio series The Hybrid Age, featuring Dr. Thomas Horn and legendary radio personality Steve Quayle. This amazing audio series is nearly 5 hours in length and discusses the game-changing genetic advances scientists are making now. Plus, you'll also receive the 2-time Telly Award-winning documentary Inhuman, featuring members of the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics, top transhumanists, and world-renowned theologians discussing how thousands of government and private research facilities around the world are already working to rewrite what it means to be human. But that's not all. With every Milieu Hyper collection, we're also giving away a surprise package with a retail value of $75 in extraordinary overstock products, mystery items that may include books, audio series, music CDs, DVDs, documentary movies, emergency preparedness items, and more. Sold separately, these items hold a retail value of over $160. Yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. So arm yourself for the days ahead with everything you need to know about the coming hybrid age. Get the Milieu Hyper Collection now at skywatchtvstore.com or by calling 1-844-750-4985.